Welcome everyone to Raku Raku Japanese, a podcast where I do not teach the Japanese but rather talk about my experience of learning this language and the journey I'm still in, and maybe share some tips and advice for those who are thinking of learning Japanese or already learning it. I am your host, Aidana Hasanova. Before we get into today's topic, I would like to briefly mention that our project, our podcast Raku Raku Japanese, was supported by Experimental Humanities Collaborative Network Sun Grant, aka Asia Voices. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of our podcast. Today, let's try to answer one important question, which you as a person who is studying Japanese as a foreign language should learn first, like kanji first or directly vocabulary, the words themselves. The disclaimer is that there is no clear answer or absolute answer, as it depends on a lot of factors and as there are many different approaches and views on this debate. Let me first explain the difference itself, between these two approaches. As you know, in Japanese there are three writing systems: hiragana, consisting of 46 characters that represent syllables or sounds, and katakana also consists of these 46 characters that represent the same sounds, the same syllables, but they look a bit different than hiragana, and they are primarily used for loan words as well as for some other purposes. And then there is kanji. Kanjis are characters that represent meaning or concept. A single kanji can have different meanings and pronunciation, and it all depends on where that kanji appears. I know kanji is so intimidating to many Japanese language learners. The reason is that's because there are so many kanji out there, and because some of them really look alike, and it starts to get confusing to memorize them or to differentiate them when you see them together. Speaking of the numbers of kanji, it says that there are several tens of thousands of kanjis, but it is believed that you need only approximately 2,000 kanjis to be able to understand most of the daily text in Japanese, like newspapers, social media, short novels, and so on. Currently, there is actually an official set of 2,136 kanji characters. They are called Jōyō kanji, common use kanji that the Japanese government recognizes as characters that are necessary for daily communication. So some Japanese language learners take this list of common use kanji, or as an alternative they can use the list of kanji divided into each level of JLPT exam and then learn them one by one. First they learn the way to write this particular kanji, its pronunciation, most of the time several ways of pronouncing it, meaning or meanings, and possibly examples of words where this kanji is used. They do it for each kanji starting from the easiest and most frequent ones to more and more advanced ones. On contrary, there are those learners who learn vocabulary or words directly. For example, when they are reading a text in Japanese or listening to Japanese speech, they encounter some unknown word and try to learn it. For example, they learn the word gakusei, which consists of two kanji characters. So instead of learning individual kanji, they learn the whole word directly. And in the process, when they learn more and more such kind of words, they also get to know the meaning of a certain kanji character because they see that there is some connection between the words where that kanji appears. And personally, I prefer the second approach. I did try to learn kanji one by one by writing it down, learning its pronunciation, meanings, and writing down some examples of words where this kanji appears. But it wasn't very effective to me in terms of memorization. After doing some practice, I realized that I better memorize kanji when they appear in a word or in a phrase or several words. So this is why I decided to focus on vocabulary through contextual learning. It is also a topic that I explore in the second episode of our podcast. But I do recognize that there are still some clear advantages of the first approach. So now I would like to discuss some pros and cons of each of these two approaches. Okay, first, kanji. Kanji characters are essential to understanding the meanings of Japanese words. They are like building blocks, so learning them can help you to remember new vocabulary words faster and more easily. I read about one person's experience where he first focused on kanji only, memorized many of the most frequently used kanji characters, and only after that started learning words which now turned out to be much easier to memorize because the words that he now learned, they consisted of the same kanji that he already learned. So this process became much easier. But the thing is, it takes time. It takes a lot of time to memorize all these characters, like 1,000 to 2,000 characters. But after you're done with it, it becomes much easier to learn new vocabulary. But overall, yeah, it might be very time consuming. Another advantage of learning kanji in detail is I think it can especially help you to read and write in Japanese. There are people who are good at speaking and listening, but when it comes to reading text in Japanese, they might not be real good at it because of the many kanji characters that appear there that are unknown to this person. But learning kanji characters in isolation can be less effective than learning them in the context of Japanese words and phrases, as you might not fully understand how they are used in practice. But on contrary, when you're learning Japanese vocabulary directly, it can be I think more practical and relevant to your everyday life than learning individual kanji characters, as you will be able to use them immediately when you talk with other people, when you write something, and so on. Finally, it might depend on individuals, but personally for me, learning kanji when it already appears in a word is somehow easier than learning individual kanjis and memorize their several pronunciations and meanings at the same time. And lastly, of course, it is also possible to use both of these approaches at the same time. For example, each day you'll learn 10 kanjis, for example 15 or at least 5 every day from this Jōyō kanji, and then you also acquire vocabulary through input and also try to memorize them. So it is perfectly possible to combine both of these approaches together. So overall, this is it for today's episode of Raku Raku Japanese. Thank you for listening to this episode and stay tuned for the next one.